but disappointing result for Canada at the Gold Cup. Of course, they bow out in the quarterfinal. They lose to number 106 ranked Guatemala. And Josh, you've been around this team for a while. You've traveled with this team on the same plane as them through CONCACAF and some of the situations that they've been in. Was this a shock to you, having been around that team so much, or could you have seen this coming?
No, this was a shock and this is a failure for the team, right? Like you can't go into this tournament with designs on winning it or at least making the final, and they can say publicly that that their goal is just gradual improvement, but I think this team wanted to win this tournament and thought they could win this tournament, right? And I think the same could be said for the Nations League in March. So we can't just consider this Gold Cup tournament in a vacuum. We have to be looking at this team in terms of how are they getting on before the World Cup. This is a shock because this team looked quite different from the team that we saw last summer that, turned Copa America on its head, relied on their talent, played to their strengths. I don't really want to hear much of the, well, Canada wasn't at full strength. They were suffering from injuries because when you look at the sheer talent that this team had, where a lot of these guys are playing their club soccer, they should have put this game against Guatemala to bed very early on. But it was a number of individual errors. It was some really poor decisions from the coaching staff that really sunk this team. And I think, again, it's fair to look big picture at where we're at right now. This is a team that really believes that they can contend with the world's best at the World Cup, and everything has to be viewed through that lens. You guys look at it through that lens as well. When you can't get through low, mid-end CONCACAF teams, something isn't working, something isn't right, and you still have a year to kind of get things right. I'm sure if for whatever reason this kind of tournament was right before the World Cup, there'd be a little more panic. So I don't think we're in full-blown panic mode, and we shouldn't be. There has to be an eye towards improvement, tinkering, and it's interesting to me, like so much of one thing, there's been a lot of things that we've been talking about around this team, but one thing that we've been talking about with this team is plan B, C, and D, right? Jesse Marsch went after an English reporter earlier in the Gold Cup when the reporter suggested that Jesse Marsch maybe doesn't have a plan B, C, D, and could this team really just play aggressive, relentless soccer through a tournament against stingy teams? I think, interestingly enough, what we need to see now is more of those different plans, more different looks from this men's national team, right? Because I think what we saw, this or how this team was exposed is when you play relentless soccer, it catches up to you. That's what led to the Jacob Schaffelberg 2 yellow cards, right? That's what led to, having 3 forwards on when you're down a man and up a goal, right? It's always go, go, go with this team. And at times it works, but I think what we've seen is that there just has to be different looks and different approaches with this team. That was my big takeaway. They have a year. I think they're going to be playing some very good opponents over the next year. Yes, there's no tournament, but they are going to be playing some very good tournaments. But this tournament, this Gold Cup failure really stressed for me the need for this team under Jesse Marsch to evolve.
And I know you dove into it a lot more in your recent column on The Athletic as well, but you mentioned that this isn't panic mode yet for
No.
Canada. What is panic mode if not losing to the number 106 ranked team in your last competitive game before the World Cup?
Well, panic mode probably comes in the World Cup if you lose your first game and you have to win your next one, right? And that panic will be justifiable, right? Because again, maybe I do this too much, maybe we do this too much, but the World Cup is truly what matters here. That's how Jesse Marsch is going to be defined with Canada. That's how this core of players is going to be defined having a World Cup at home. And there wasn't any panic when they lost, and when this core lost in 22 to Belgium, because it was a little bit of, well, it's their first time at the dance, a little bit of happy to be there, a little bit of they played really, really well against Belgium. So there wasn't really any time to panic. You give up 4 to Croatia, and then it's like, well, we didn't even have a chance to sound the alarm. This time around, I think because there's been noticeable improvement, they look different. At times they've looked better. I think this team feels like they deserve better results in the World Cup. I don't know. It's easy as well to panic, but like, what does that get you, right? What does that get us as a soccer community? No one is calling for Jesse Marsch's, to be fired, and that's good. He shouldn't be, or maybe people are. I don't know. You guys maybe spend more time on Twitter. You're raising your eyes. Maybe people are, but we shouldn't be, right? I don't know if I would be. This is the right manager for this group of players, and what we saw at Copa America suggested that there is another level there, but strangely they just almost taken a step back. I was quite disappointed with multiple performances throughout the Gold Cup, right? And I think against Curacao, that was disappointing. I think just how they gave into what El Salvador wanted to do, that was disappointing. But we've seen enough against good teams. What we saw against Ukraine suggests that the sky hasn't completely fallen. So it's not time to panic for me, because you have more time, and this just felt a little bit like an opponent or a team playing down to their opponent. So maybe you'll be better off in the World Cup, but I just don't think panicking gets us as a soccer. I don't know. Let me turn it over to you guys. And I suppose maybe that's what Dunlop would do. Do you feel it's time to panic? Do you feel like suggesting coaching change, even though that's what some big soccer nations would do? And I know we all want to be a quote unquote soccer country. Do you think there's any merit in that right now?
Alex?
Oh boy. I mean, I would say no, because again, that's not my style. I think that's a bit over exaggerated, but I guess why I think it's complicated in this entire wake of it all is ultimately big expectations brings a certain pressure where fairly or unfairly people are calling for Jesse Marsch's head. Fairly unfairly people are questioning certain spots of guys in the national team. The reality is,
Well, those are two very different things. Sorry,
Oh,
those are two very, very different things. I think what this tournament is, it's certainly exposed. And again, some context here, having been around this team a lot, having gotten to know the inner workings of this team a fair bit. One of the goals of the Gold Cup was for Jesse Marsch and the coaching staff to learn less about his top 6, 7, 8 guys, which he knows are going to be dependent on in the World Cup, as it was, let's learn about everybody else and see who we can truly depend on, right? Who is that? Who are the other 2/3 of our 26? And can I depend on them in tournament games? I think there are far more questions about that side of the argument than the Jesse Marsch thing, right? I think there's no merit in discussing a coaching change whatsoever, because that would only set the program back. But I think you can, and I hope we can talk about some of these players. There are more than a few players that I wonder if they should have a spot in the national team come 26, and B, if they're ready for full-time minutes just yet.
I think this tournament was a success in terms of that player development step and expanding the player pool, because you look at, what Marsch said after losing to Argentina at MetLife last year, and it was all about expanding the player pool and making sure that this summer was different. And we saw that with Saliba getting a transfer mid-tournament, Nico Sigur playing every single match and standing out. We saw that, Zoran Basong even comes into the national team picture as well.
Sigur did not stand out in the last game. Sigur did not stand out when they needed him to. And You guys know I'm a Nico Seeger guy. I think he's probably a starter at the World Cup, but there was something lacking in terms of his build-up play. And I think Canada failed to go up 2-0. If they go up 2-0, we're all probably on flights to St. Louis right now, and we're circling barbecue spots. But their build-up play was really quite poor in the first half. And I think it still remains to be seen whether Nico Seeger is a right back or a midfielder for Canada. I like him in the midfield. He reminds me so much of one of my favorite players ever, Joshua Kimmich. No surprise there. But I don't know if Marsch knows just yet. Obviously, right back is Alistair Johnston's role. But the development thing is interesting. Like, yes, Luke de Fougerolles, Nico Seeger, Nathan Saliba did have good tournaments when you look at it from 30,000 feet. But those players were always kind of on that ascent anyway, right? And I wondered if there were going to be other players to step up and surprise, because for as many players young players that we could say had good tournaments, there were some young players that really stumbled. I don't know about Daniel Jebuson's role in this team yet. We can still say yet for all of this. He failed to really take control of games in the way that I think the coaching staff hoped he would. And that's disappointing because, and I think Promise David had moments when he's close to goal, he's ruthless, but I still have real questions about his fitness levels in a Jesse Marsch team, not necessarily in other teams, but in a Jesse Marsch team. And a lot of expectations, a lot of hype around the guy, deserved after what he did in Belgium. But then for country, I'm just like, there's still something missing. And again, so for every young player that did grab a hold of it, there were a few that didn't as well.
Well, on the flip side too, you talk about the youngsters. I would echo that. That's obviously something we do a lot of here on the show. But
For
you look at
sure.
the veterans. That's where the real questions for me lie, because the next 12 months is so tough because there's a balance between you want a certain leadership in the group, right? Guys who've been there, but then where's that line where there's potential? There's guys coming in. I look at a few debates. What goes on with, up front? Kyle Laren's the easy one to look at, of where does his role fit in this team where he had a quiet tournament. This was a bit of a chance for him to maybe, with Jebuson struggling with a lack of clarity up front. You look in midfield, it didn't help that he got injured, but Jonathan Osorio struggled to keep up with the pace of, what happened at the Canadian Shield. Of course, he brings other intangibles in terms of intelligence, but if all of a sudden Seeger steps into midfield, that midfield's crowded. You look at the back, Kamal Miller. Where does he fit in this group?
Yep.
Even in goal, on the flip side, you got guys like Max Crepeau, who all of a sudden his stock maybe raises a bit with how things go. The veterans are also, I think, an interesting point that makes it hard to assess. I think for us, it's easy to be like, look, this young guy should go, this young guy should go. Look, I do it all the time, but also it's tough because from Jesse Marsch's standpoint, there are some veterans that he's going to have some tough conversations and battles to look at.
So where's your number one area of concern up and down the field for 26 right now? Because you could look at the center backs. Derek Cornelius did struggle with an injury, and we didn't really get a lot of clarity on that. And he obviously struggled on the goal last night, right? He needs to do a better job there, but he's also coming off a longer club season than a lot of players around him. There's a bit of a drop off at center back after Moise Bombito, and Luke de Fougerolles. Again, we know we're all Luke de Fougerolles fans here, right? For sure. And I think it's got to be said, putting him up for a penalty felt like an egregious error that could have been prevented. Right. And I know we're going off in different directions here, but that's something that I think was missing, was a little bit more accountability and a little bit more of kind of admissions of errors here, because de Fougerolles misses the penalty against Ivory Coast. And you say, okay, like it's a friendly, give him a shot. But 19-year-olds think differently than seasoned veterans. And I think he's a remarkable young person. Haven't gotten to know him a little bit, but you could when a young player misses a penalty in a knockout round game, and you can see him almost immediately flip, not to tears, but whatever the level ahead of tears is, you say, why was he put up for a penalty there? Because development is one thing, but you really have got to be careful there. And I worried about that. So like again, center back, we've probably got one player that we say yes for sure, but he didn't even play in the Gold Cup. That's Moise Bombito. Middle of the park, there's a lot of promise there. Saliba, Siger, but when it mattered, they struggled. And who's going to play beside Jonathan David? That was a big question coming into the tournament, and I don't know yet if we have an answer. It feels like Tanny time, but Tanny needs to convert more. So I don't know where you guys are at in terms of your biggest area of concern.
For me, it's the striker position, but I do want to touch on center back as well, because that choice to put Luc de Fougerols up, you saw the way that he took that penalty, smashing it right down the middle. That was somebody that was frustrated stepping up to that penalty kick. He didn't
Yep.
want the poor or attempted well placed shot that he did against Ivory Coast. It was a terrible penalty that he took, and he didn't want to do that again. So he takes a no nonsense penalty down the middle, and it's a few inches too high, goes off the bar. Canada's out of this tournament. But the striker position is the part that I'm most concerned about, because, Kyle Aaron, I think there's questions about whether you even want to include him on this team when there's other Canadian strikers like, I don't know, Jason Russell-Rowe. He scored last night, a 1-0 win for Columbus Crew over the Philadelphia Union. And there are other Canadian strikers that you can pick here that aren't, Daniel Jebison. We'll see how he does on his loan. Jason Russell-Rowe, I think, is right there. I mean, you could even throw in a guy like DeAndre Kerr has been okay at Toronto. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily worse than Kyle Aaron for the amount of expectation and weight that he brings along with his experience to this roster, Alex.
Yeah, well, that's the striker for me is just such a huge question, because the reality is I look at this team ahead of next year. For again, we're going to use that World Cup lens that Josh been using that I like. Like, I think this back four, it continues to almost fall through the cracks. Like, since the Netherlands put four past them about a year ago, they've had what? Argentina put two against them twice, and Mexico put two against them. They haven't had any blowouts. The back line is good. I think the back line is going to be what holds them together, especially with Bombito back. I think the midfield, especially with Eustachio in there, it's solid. All of a sudden now, this team, it's a question of can they score? Because the reality is, other than a Honduras outburst here, a Ukraine outburst there, there's been a lot more 0-0 against Cote d'Ivoire, 1-1 against Curacao, 2-0 against El Salvador, 1-1 against Guatemala, where you leave gritting your teeth, being like, what the heck happened? And that, for me, it's tough, because it's not like you're sitting there looking at a lack of talent. They're most talented up front and out wide, but for whatever reason, the combinations, the players, this maybe even you look at the tactical fit hasn't always clicked with consistency and with regularity. So yeah, that's where I look at what's the best striker fit. Jonathan David has been basically the lone constant. I think Tajon Buchanan, his play over the last month, has helped them. But, Josh mentioned earlier, Promise David, where does he fit? Daniel Owase, can he be more consistent? Can we get a resurgence from Kyle Aaron? Is Jason Russell-Rowe the guy? Are we not talking about someone who's not here? What's going on with Jacob Schaffelberg? For a year, everything he touched was gold. And now all of a sudden it felt like everything he touched this tournament was the opposite. I think the attack is really the big concern, and it's so tough to analyze because they have all the pieces. Jesse Marsch told us they have weapons. I had a fun stat I found in my research last night. Canada has 3 goals from substitutes under Jesse Marsch, guys. One's the Jonathan David goal against Uruguay, so he's not really a substitute. He's not a guy you can count. The other 2 was Junior Hoylett against Suriname, leg 1 quarterfinals. The other one was Promise David versus Honduras. They don't get enough goals from their subs, and they should, because they have these weapons. They have this deep attacking pool, and they haven't even come close to maximizing it.